welcome to Awaken Love, Engaged Couples. Glad you're here. Ruth and I, my name is Jim. This is my wife, Ruth. We've been married 30 years, and we have four grown daughters, amazing grown daughters. And Ruth has been teaching class about 6 years.
You want to start over?
Yeah.
Okay.
Welcome to Awaken Love, Engaged Edition. My name is Jim. This is my wife, Ruth. About 6 years ago, Ruth and I experienced an awakening in our sex life. And from that awakening, Ruth started teaching classes to married women. And a few years after that, we started teaching class to husbands to help them understand their wives. And then recently, we started teaching engaged intimacy classes. So that's how we got to this point of recording them.
We're excited to offer video classes for engaged couples. Sex is not a topic that's often talked about in church.
No.
In fact, many of us hear hardly anything about it. And so even in counseling sessions, a lot of times pastors just kind of gloss over the sex section.
Pre-marriage counseling.
Yeah, what did I say? In counseling?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm as nervous as you are.
We need some notes.
Is this like too scripted?
No, this is good. How did you and Melanie do it?
I don't know.
Let's keep going.
Okay, we'll just work out. Sex is not a topic often addressed in church. And in fact, often in premarital counseling, the pastors just gloss over the topic of sex. So we want to try to get you off on the right foot by helping you understand how you've been impacted by culture and the world, but also sharing God's truth with you about sex. If you're watching these videos with your fiance, we're going to ask that you pause the videos to discuss questions. And if you're watching it with your engaged group, then we're going to ask the same thing. We believe that transformation takes place in community when we start talking. And so the best thing that you can do to get your sex life off on the right foot is to start talking about sex.
Yep.
So the first mixer question that we have for you is, what have you heard from your family about sex? And the next mixer question we have for you is, what did you hear from the church about sex? Pause.
So I hope you had a good discussion there about what you heard from your family and what you heard from your church about sex. From my family, I heard very little. And from church, I heard, don't do it until you're married. But I do remember going to one leadership conference when I was in junior high, and they talked about masturbation being a perfectly natural thing. And I felt so relieved to find out that I'm not the only one who's masturbating.
When I was a kid, I vividly remember at my best friend's house, we went out to the garage and we snuck a couple of her dad's Playboy magazines and went and looked through them on her bed that afternoon as we giggled. I remember watching soap operas all the time as a kid and being so intrigued by sex. And my parents probably talked about it a little, but it never felt very comfortable talking to them or asking questions.
So for most of us, from our experience from teaching these classes, we find out most people hear very little from their parents about sex. So a few do, and those who hear about good messages about sex transition from being single to married very well. But most of us don't get those messages. So
yeah, even the sometimes it's not even what our parents say, but it's how uncomfortable they are with the topic. And so some of those awkward sex talks with our parents can be almost as impactful in kind of a negative way.
Right. And from the church, we get this, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it until you're married. And then once you're married, they push you together and they say, do it a lot. No, they don't say that really. But I remember going to weddings where I was not going to do it.
All right. I think in church, a lot of times it's do it for your husband once you're married.
Now, the
And
guys don't get that. The guys get the message that sex is going to be great. But maybe the women get a little different message.
you're going there.
I don't know. I was just trying that out. Now you get the do it from your husband, do it for your husband. It's even in Christian books.
Let's try this again.
Where?
I don't care. Like, I just feel like I need to know where you're, I need to know how to read you a little better.
Okay.
Okay. So you start out the conversation and let's just ad lib for a little bit.
Oh, okay. So most of us probably didn't have a lot of discussion with our parents about sex. So a few did, but generally from what we see from class is not many of us have heard anything about sex from our parents or from church. And those who did have a good positive message about sex from their parents, they transitioned well from singleness to married life. And but
I would save the conversation about those that had good conversations to the very end.
Okay.
Because it dilutes everything.
Yeah.
So if you want to talk about people having about those few, then save it towards the very end where we talk about how like we can change things for the next generation if we just start talking about sex.
So if that's the case, that if we didn't get many messages from the church or from our parents, we can change that in the next generation. It's our choice to change that. So you can talk to your kids and you can talk at church about this and then change it for the better in the future.
Okay, let's do this again.
Okay.
Just like, okay. Start with your story. Then I'll talk about my story and we'll just talk a little bit about what are some of the common messages that people got from their parents. And then we'll talk a little bit about common messages from church. And then we'll talk about changing things.
Okay.
Those are the bullet points.
Okay. So I hope you had some good conversations. As I was growing up, I heard very little about sex from my parents and very little about church. And the only thing I did learn about at church, I was at a leadership conference when I was in junior high, and they talked about masturbation being a perfectly natural thing. And I felt so relieved to find out I wasn't the only one masturbating.
Yeah, I have vivid memories of in first grade, my best friend showing me her dad's Playboy magazines, and we slipped them out of the garage and went into her bedroom and looked at those. I also remember watching soap operas and being just infatuated by sex that was happening.
Oh.
A lot of us didn't have a lot of messages from our parents besides don't do it, or sometimes awkward conversations, or sometimes a woman will talk about how her parents just left a book on the end table and didn't say anything.
And do you have any questions?
And do you have any questions?
And the same thing for church. We didn't get a lot from church, and we didn't get more than don't do it until you're married. And there's so much more to sex, and we didn't hear much about it.
Right. And even the silence tells us something, right? It makes us feel like there's something wrong with it. There's shame connected with it. I think that how awkward our parents are talking about sex makes us feel like there's something wrong with it, even in marriage, maybe.
So that being said, if we didn't hear much from our parents and we didn't hear much from church, we can change it for the next generation. We can collectively change it. We can talk to our kids. We can talk to our spouse. We can talk to our church. We can say, we want to talk about this. We want this to be normal conversation, and we can make a change in the next generation.
So we want you to spend a little more time recognizing the messages you've received about sex, and we want you to answer the following questions. What have you heard from the world? So that might be the media, TV, movies, or friends about having sex outside of marriage.
And the same thing, what have you heard from the world, media, movies, TV, about sex within marriage? And we'll get back together.
And you won't even need to say, we'll get back together.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. I'm gonna keep going.
Mhm.
So, media constantly portrays sex as super hot outside of marriage. And usually the man and the woman are having intercourse and they have a simultaneous orgasm and there's no mess. Nobody runs off to the bathroom and everybody's happy and the stars align. And the man and the woman are young and thin and beautiful, and they don't have to communicate what they want. They know what each other wants. It's like magic.
Yeah, and I think that even the fact that you can in media, like you can have sex with all these different people and it doesn't have any kind of emotional impact on you,
Right.
And there's no guilt or feeling bad afterwards. There's no baggage. There's no struggle with flashbacks afterwards. It's just a physical thing.
Right.
And within marriage,
you know what
there are very few message. Most TV shows portray sex in marriage as boring, and it's usually a husband chasing around a wife, and with the wife just like almost making fun of the husband for wanting sex, and so like there's a drastic contrast between sex inside of marriage and sex outside of marriage as far as how it's portrayed.
Wow.
Before we talk about God's design for sex, what we want you to realize through these mixer questions is that we've been impacted from messages from the world. And it might be our parents, it might be church, but it also might be media.
Yeah.
Media has been telling us things about sex.
If the church, if our parents aren't going to tell about sex, the world and media will. They'll fill that void, and they have filled that void. They're telling us about their idea of sex.
And these messages change how we feel about sex. And for women, sex is 90% in our mind. And so these messages have a huge impact on whether we expect to enjoy sex or we expect that sex in marriage is going to be awful. And so the first step to working on your sex life is to realize, okay, what's impacting me, and recognizing that. So we want you to kind of just start with a clean slate today, and we want to share with you what did God really intend for your sex life, and what is it supposed to look like? Something like that. Huh?
Yep. So we're going to talk about the reasons God designed sex right from his word. Everything we get for this class is right from God's word. So first, Genesis 1:28 says, sex is to create life. And we read in Genesis 1:28, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. So God created sex to create babies, to create life. And he could have done it any number of ways, like worms divide in two to create more worms. And how sick would that be? No, he made sex super intimate for human beings so that we get to know each other. Second, God designed sex to unify a husband and wife. So we read from Genesis 2:24, a man shall leave his father and mother and shall cleave to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. To become one emotionally, spiritually, and physically one. And we hear this often in purity messages about becoming one. And we also, the thing we don't hear so much about is the mysterious thing that happens when we become one. And I think from men and from our teaching in men's classes, we realize that men understand this. They don't know. Men get this. They don't understand why it works, but they get that sex creates oneness with your wife. So if you're in a little disagreement and you come together with sex, you can get over that disagreement much easier. We understand that it works. We don't understand why it works, but we understand it does work.
I think women struggle with this one. I know there have been times when Jim approached me for sex and we were not in agreement. And I thought, how in the world can you think about sex now? Because we hadn't talked through things. And so this is a real stretch for women. And I think there are a couple of things. One, you need to trust your husband and you need to know your husband. And if he is a loving, kind, gentle husband that would do anything for you, he's that same man when he initiates sex. And the second thing is that you need to trust God, because this isn't easy for us. And so that means, and maybe before sex, we may need to just pray and say, God, will you help me get on board with this? Will you help me to enter in to this union?
So to summarize,
because I can't do it on my own.
So to summarize this part about unifying husband and wife, making you one, is, guys, your wife needs to be able to trust you. So you have to do everything to gain her trust in every part of you, so that she knows that you're not just doing this to have sex, you're doing this because you love her. And that she always knows when she looks into your eyes, it's the same man she married.
So the next reason that God created sex comes out of Genesis 4:1 in the King James Version. And it says, and the man knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain. And so sex is a way that we get to know each other. Now, when you have sex, you share your body in intimate ways that nobody else sees or nobody else knows. And I think that women are really in tune to this knowing each other through sex.
Yeah.
They don't want they don't want their husband to just figure out a routine of how to get you from point A to point B, but they want you to continue on this journey of getting to know you. Because if you look at your wife's closet or your fiance's closet, she has like 50 pairs of shoes, whereas you have
5 pair,
maybe
and
5 pair.
They're all for utility.
And so she wants you to just keep trying to get to know her in new ways and to learn something new about her. I don't know.
That's good. So the next exercise we're going to do is rubbering versus feeling.
So in order to help you understand the difference between just going through the motions and really getting to know each other, I want you to do a little exercise. And I want everybody to take their right hand and I want you to rub your left wrist. Everybody's rubbing their left wrist with me now, I hope. And now I want you to stop. And this time, instead of rubbing your wrist, I want you to think about feeling your wrist. And I want you to think first about feeling the surface of the skin. And then I want you to think about feeling underneath the surface of the skins, like you might feel veins or tendons. You might even close your eyes so you can even focus even more. And then try leaving your fingers attached to the skin on your wrist and move with that skin to completely eliminate friction. And you can feel underneath that skin even clearer. So we want you to spend some time as a group or a couple talking about what's the difference between rubbing and feeling. What changed when you went from just rubbing to feeling? So probably one of the clearest changes is just the speed, right?
Yep.
You go from kind of frantically rubbing to a much slower pace when you're trying to feel your wrist. The other thing that a lot of people mention when we do this exercise is that instead of just mindlessly rubbing, you're actually thinking about it. You're being intentional. You're focusing.
You're producing a map in your head of what you're feeling.
Right. And so if you want to get to know each other through sex, then you need to feel each other. You need to know each other's bodies so well that you begin to read each other's bodies.
Yeah.
You can't read each other's minds, but you can read each other's bodies. So the next reason that God created sex is for pleasure. And this comes out of Song of Songs, and it's after the wedding night. And there's a passage where it says, "Eat, O friends, and drink. Drink your fill, O lovers." And a lot of people think this is God speaking over the couple. And it's drink your fill to the point of intoxication, like get drunk on each other.
On your love.
And so sex is supposed to be pleasurable and in a way that you're not holding yourself back from pleasure. You're fully enjoying this gift that God gives you. Another physical evidence that sex is for pleasure is God created women with a clitoris that has absolutely no other function than pleasure. It's not involved in the reproduction cycle. It's not involved in anything else. It's just for pleasure. And this is part of the evidence that God wants sex to be mutually enjoyable for both husband and wife, not just for husband.
Right. So the fifth reason God created sex is a defense against temptation. So we read Proverbs 5:15, and it says, "Drink water from your own well. Share your love with only your wife. Why spill the water from your springs in the street? Having sex with just anyone? You should reserve sex for yourself. You should reserve it for yourselves. Never share it with strangers. Let your wife be a fountain of blessing for you. Rejoice in the wife of your youth. She is a loving doe. She's a loving deer and a graceful doe. Let her breast satisfy you always. May you always be captivated by her love." So it's love. Sex is to be a guard against temptation. He's saying, don't share this with others. Only share this with your wife. And it's a choice to be captivated. It says, may you be captivated. It's your choice if you want to do it. And if you do it, if you're captivated by your wife and her beauty, it's a guard against temptation. Now, if someone does view porn, who's responsible? Is it the person viewing or the spouse? It's the person viewing. So you are responsible for not guarding your eyes and not and guarding against temptation. Same thing about having an affair. Who's responsible? The person who had the affair, not the other spouse. Is there anything else you want to say?
Can we do this again?
Yeah.
Can you just start with this one?
What do you want to do though?
I want to interject that I think as women that like women think, well, I need to have sex with him.
Oh, right.
This many times a week. So
okay. It's a defense. Sex is a defense against temptation. And we read this in Proverbs 5:15. Drink water from your own well. Share your love with only your wife. Why spill the water of your springs in the streets, having sex with just anyone? You should reserve it for yourselves. Never share it with strangers. Let your wife be a fountain of blessing for you. Rejoice in the wife of your youth. She is a loving deer, a graceful doe. Let her breast satisfy you always. May you always be captivated by her love. So sex is a guard. It's a defense against temptation, but it's a choice. You have to choose to be captivated by your wife. And it says, may you be captivated. You have to choose to be captivated. You have to watch your wife. And you have to be captivated by her 24/7.
I think a lot of women take this verse and they think, well, I need to have sex with my husband so he won't look at porn or he won't have an affair. And I think there are probably a lot of books that might suggest that we're responsible.
Okay, so if somebody does have an affair or view porn, who's responsible? The person viewing porn or having the affair or the other spouse? It's the person viewing the porn or having the affair. You have to be responsible for that. So you have to be responsible for your actions and make the choice to be captivated by your wife and be satisfied by her breasts. Okay, the sixth reason is comes from sex is a comfort, and we read this in 2 Samuel 12:24. Then David comforted his wife Bathsheba, and he went and lay with her, and they conceived a son. So after David and Bathsheba lost their child, David went and comforted her with sex, and we see it right here in the Bible. So it's true for both husbands and wives. And the way this played out for me, I remember early on in our marriage being very stressed about work and coming home and thinking, I hope Ruth doesn't want to have sex.
You can't go there.
Don't even do it? Just leave it out? I can leave it out.
Well, no, you have to go about it a different way, because you're telling them sex is a comfort, and then you're telling them it wasn't a comfort for you, but you're telling them the story about it not being a comfort for you. If it's not a comfort for you, then you have to start with, like, I didn't get this right.
Oh, right.
Because otherwise they're going off in the story and they're expecting that you're going to tell them that sex was a comfort for you.
Oh, okay. I didn't get that right. Okay. Let me start over.
It's okay. Sorry.
So David comforted Bathsheba with sex. Now, I didn't get this right away. I didn't get this at all. When we were first married, and I'd be stressed about work or anything like that, I wouldn't bring it to Ruth and share it. And I'd think to myself, oh, please, I don't want to have sex tonight. No, let me see.
I think that's okay.
Oh, please, I don't want to have sex tonight because I'm too stressed out to have sex. It wasn't a comfort. I didn't understand this. It wasn't until later when I learned that I needed to talk to Ruth about my stress and bring her into my life that we could make sex a comfort.
Have you ever experienced, I'm just talking to you, have you ever experienced sex as a comfort? Like, was it a comfort to you after Charlie's funeral?
Did we have sex after Charlie's funeral? What were we at my parents' house?
Yeah. Has it ever been a comfort to you?
I don't know. Mm-hmm. Has it to you?
Yeah. I don't know that it used to be a comfort. I mean, I even think about, like, if I'm starting to feel depressed, sex helps to pull me back up out of the pit. When I've been stressed about classes, or when I felt totally inadequate about classes.
Well, do you want to talk about that?
Sex was...
Maybe it'd be better if you talk about that.
Maybe. You want to do the last one?
No. I'm just saying, what if I just stop? What if I don't do that example? I think the only thing I think I like about the examples, it talks to the guys about sharing their stress and their anxieties with their spouse.
Yeah, and I'm not against that, but you have to make sure you start out with, I didn't used to get this.
So how about we do that? Say, I didn't get this. I talk about my part, and then you can just chime in.
Yeah. Yep.
So David used sex to comfort Bathsheba after they lost their child. Now, I didn't get this at first. And I remember being so stressed about work that I'd come home and say, oh, I hope Ruth doesn't want to have sex tonight because there's no way I could have sex tonight. And I didn't get that if I had shared my stress with Ruth in our marriage, we'd have had a much stronger marriage. Plus, we'd have had great comforting sex.
And this has drastically changed for me because, like you, I didn't used to ever think that sex would be a comfort. But in the last few years, I know that when there are times where I am depressed, the two of us coming together as one helps to pull me out of that pit. Or when I'm feeling inadequate about teaching classes, the best thing that I can do is become one with you, because it comforts me to know that you're in this with me. And I hear from women in classes about their experiences. And I remember one woman saying, after she had lost her sister to alcoholism, she went and asked her husband, can we just have sad sex together? And so God's intent is that sex comforts us. And this is drastically different than what the world might tell us, but this is God's intent. So the last reason that God created sex is as a picture of the intimacy that he wants with us. And this comes out of Ephesians 5:31 through 32. And it says, for this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. This is a profound mystery, but I'm talking about Christ and the church. And so Paul is talking about becoming one in marriage or having sex as a picture of intimacy with Christ. And so we can learn what's true about sex by looking at intimacy with Christ. We can learn what's true about intimacy with Christ by looking at sex. So let me give you just a couple of examples. One is that a lot of marriage books might suggest that
even Christian marriage books.
Yeah, that you kind of barter. And so, husbands, if you want your wife to have sex with her, talk to her. And wives, if you want your husband to talk to you, then have sex with them. And it's kind of this, you do this for me, I'll do this for you.
Or if you want your wife to have sex, clean the garage for her.
Right.
Or clean the windows.
Right. And I look at my relationship with Christ, and Christ doesn't barter with me. He doesn't say, well, you do this for me and I'll do this for you. He loved me while I was still a sinner. He loves me when I mess up. He loves me when I'm grumpy. He loves me always. And that's how we're supposed to love each other as husband and wife. The second thing, example, I think about my relationship with Christ. And if I just show up to church to just check it off the list, well, I'm not really that interested in coming back, quite honestly. But if I'm in this journey of really trying to get to know Christ, spending time praying, spending time in the Word, worshiping in community, my relationship with Christ gets sweeter and sweeter. And the same is true in marriage. If we're really trying to get to know each other through sex, we're on this journey of discovering each other and really spending time with each other, not just checking it off the list, then sex gets sweeter and sweeter. And so this is a great way to measure what is true about sex in marriage. So we want you to spend just a little bit of time talking about
your fiance
or with a group, how do these ideas of why God created sex, how do they align or contrast with the previous messages about sex from the world, from your parents, from church? Okay. Okay. I don't even want to go over this next section, I don't think, unless we want to kind of talk through it. Are you ready? Are you done for that?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay.
I was just going to think, I just stopped.
Yeah.